Hello everyone! We finally got the patch that we've been waiting for in Guilty Gear. It has been nearly 9 months, I believe, that we've been playing at Season 3.5, and we have long awaited a new version of the game, and it finally came. And now the question is on everyone's mind, is it a good patch? Is this the patch that we've been waiting for? Was it worth the wait? And I think it just might have been. So for today's video, I want to kind of just quickly go over some of the important changes in this patch. Kind of give my take on how they're going to affect the game, and just kind of give an idea of like what direction I think the game is going to go in. Because something to keep in mind with this patch is that Arx has said that it was a small patch. And in terms of just the raw number of changes that they made, it is relatively small. There's not that many changes. There's some system changes, and then they buffed a couple of characters. There aren't really any nerfs in there, at least direct nerfs. However, despite that, the changes they made I think are actually very impactful to the entire game. And I think there's going to be a lot of ripple effects of how we see these changes affect the cast, affect the different matchups, and just kind of affect the game flow. I think that our play patterns are going to change a fair amount with this patch, which is really exciting. You know, a lot of people got kind of bored of this version, thinking it was kind of stagnant, and I think this patch is going to help alleviate some of that. So before we get into actually discussing the changes, just a quick reminder on what was going on in Season 3.5. There was a big problem with resource economy, especially with the burst gauge, where high health characters were really benefiting from just how much burst people generated, especially while getting comboed. And it was causing problems where high health characters would get sometimes, 2+ bursts around. And it was also causing a problem where high damage characters were kind of the meta because they would kill the opponent fast enough that the opponent wouldn't actually get their burst gauge and be able to do things with the resources. On top of this, DP characters were particularly strong last version, because not only did they usually have a fair amount of health, but it also gave them enough chances that they could use their DPs, or specifically DPRC, to be able to make a comeback happen. On top of that, the kind of play patterns that were coming up because of Wall Assault giving a hard knockdown and just how snowbally the game was kind of unenjoyable for people for a while. And specifically, White Wall Assault was a big problem last version, where it just didn't really have counterplay, and it was causing the big body characters to excel in ways that I don't think they were meant to excel in. So needless to say, 3.5 was not a fan favorite version for most people. So let's talk about how this version of the game is looking to fix some of that stuff. So like I mentioned, DP characters were very strong last version for the most part. And a big reason for that was because, the game is snowbally, so having a DP to prevent yourself from getting snowballed is obviously good. But also, with the amount of burst you gained and the amount of tension that you gained for getting comboed, it meant that pretty much every match would boil down to a scenario where someone had to bait a DP from a DP character, and those characters also, like Soul and Mind, are good at making comebacks, so they would be able to do a DP and then kind of make their comeback from there. So one of the biggest changes in this version of the game is that they removed the ability to Roman cancel your DP. You just can't do it anymore. This is crazy to me because this is basically a legacy mechanic, and not just in Guilty Gear, but like Arx's fighting games. So this is also a thing in BlazBlue. You could cancel your DPs on block with meter. So the fact that Arxis has the willingness to kind of go through and remove a legacy mechanic like this, previously saw them do it with removing character weights in Season 3. I think this is good because at this point, I don't think DPRC fits the game. It was too potent of a mechanic, especially on the characters that it was on. These characters are already well-rounded. They don't need something this strong on them. And beyond just that, it's nerfing characters that are very strong already. But more specifically, if you think of some of the weaker characters of Season 3, so looking at characters like Bedman or Elphelt, for example, those characters are already not particularly strong, but they especially struggled to deal with DPs. Those characters already had issues, kind of showing off their stuff because they're not particularly strong characters, but then they would run into a DP character and it was basically a nightmare for them. Like, they were just cooked because they don't deal with DPs well. And DPRC made it even worse because you would get hit by DPRC and take like 30% and get wall broken, or you would bait it, you would block it, and then you'd be put on defense, right, from a defensive mechanic like this. So it was just too potent, and it was really too effective on the characters that had it that really didn't need something like that. So this is a really healthy change for the game, and will create, I think, a better game flow surrounding these characters that have DPs like this. It, of course, does nerf some characters more than others. Like, I think Leo and Sin, for example, are worse off with this type of change, whereas characters like Sol and Kai are, like, more or less fine with it, despite the fact they're worse. And obviously, it can also benefit them because, when they're on offense, they don't have to worry about DPRC anymore. But overall, I think it's a very healthy change for the game in a lot of different ways. Now, the next change that they made is actually in regards to Wild Assault. So Wild Assault, since its inclusion, has been, not a very liked mechanic, I would say. I have an entire video about Wild Assault and its problems that it causes. I also had a video about DPRC, so it seems like Arceus maybe is watching my YouTube videos. But anyways, in regards to Wild Assault, what they did is they made it where Wild Assault no longer gives a hard knockdown on wall breaks. This applies to all 3 Wild Assaults. It doesn't matter if you charge it or not. Just don't get a hard knockdown from Wild Assault wall break anymore. Which means that breaking the wall with Wild Assault is basically useless. It's actually been very funny to watch people play this version of the game and still break the wall with Wild Assault, forgetting that it doesn't do that anymore, and they just waste 50% of the burst. This has a big impact on the game. Just the general play patterns and game flow of the game feel so different. And it's really funny because we technically played a version of this game where we didn't have this, right? We played a version of the game without Wild Assault before. But going from a version where we did have it and then back to not having it has been a really interesting but very refreshing experience. And how this is going to change the game is actually really hard to predict, I feel like, because there have been so many changes since Season 2 beyond just Wild Assault. And Wild Assault still exists, right? You can still use a Wild Assault to do conversions. So as Sole Bad Guy, right, I can still do stuff like bar size 5H into Wild Assault and get a wall break from that. That's still very different than what Season 2 was. It's just we can't now also break that wall with Wild Assault and get a hard knockdown. So the impacts this has on the game is honestly really hard to predict. My initial instinct tells me that characters that like neutral obviously probably like this patch a little bit more. But I think it can go a lot deeper than that, where I think a lot of matchups are going to change because momentum is a little bit harder to keep. You're going to have to reset to neutral more often. Individual conversions are a little bit more valuable because you don't get to keep up momentum as hard. So being able to take one hit, do as much damage with it, and break the wall and get positive bonus is a little bit more like what you're looking at rather than just like your ability to maintain momentum. This is a big nerf for some characters, namely characters like Milia and Baiken, who are very momentum snowball heavy characters. Maybe even like Ino as well. Whereas there are some characters that like the hard knockdown, such as Happy Chaos and Bridget, but I also think they're fine with the version where you go back to neutral more often as well. And then there are some characters who like maybe just straight up benefit, like Ramthal, for example. So it's really hard to predict how the change is going to affect the game, and it's one of those examples of like kind of a ripple change, where it's just going to have this kind of trickle down effect on the meta of the game. And I think it's going to be a little bit before we fully realize how much this changes the game, I would say. Next change I want to talk about has to do with White Wall Assault. Now, if you've been following Guilty Gear, you've probably seen many people complain about this mechanic. It is probably the most hated thing about Season 3 and 3.5, if I had to guess. White Wall Assault is a very strong mechanic. It has invincibility on startup, so it kind of exists for big bodies to be able to plow through those like big to, mid to long range normals in neutral, and just give them the ability to get in, right? Which on its own is very strong, but not inherently a problem. The problem with the mechanic before is that it did not have counterplay. It was plus on block, it guard crushed you. It was very hard to maneuver around because it hit so high, you couldn't really jump over it or anything like that. So what they did in this version of the game is they made it where it is minus on block, and specifically, it's actually -3. So you can see here as a Sole Bad Guy, if I actually timed it right, I'm actually able to punish this on block. So most characters don't have a 3-frame normal, they can't just straight up punish it, but what it does allow you to do is it allows you to take your turn. You can go for a strike throw mix up, you can just make them block a close slash and do that type of thing. This is a very big change for this type of mechanic because they basically made it to where it's a mechanic that actually has strategy behind it rather than just like, you know what, I have burst gauge, why not just do it? My opponent can't really do anything about it anyway, so screw it, send it. The mechanic has counterplay now, so I actually like it now where, as the big body, if you think someone's going to press their big button to try to keep you out, right? They're pressing far slashes and 5/8s and stuff like that, you can White Wall Assault to try to plow through it and get in. You as a defending character, you can now take that opportunity to read that they're going to do White Wall Assault and use this as an opportunity to just block it, and then force them to block a close slash or do a strike throw mix-up or something like that, and they're losing the resource for doing it, which is a really big deal in this version of the game. If you as the big body are anticipating that they're going to be passive and look to block White Wall Assault, then you can just approach normally with like a dash or a jump or something and take advantage of their passiveness. So there's actually strategy around White Wall Assault, there's actually counterplay to it, and it's not just mind-numbingly, I'm going to do it because it is just that powerful and doesn't have counterplay. So this is a pretty big change because even though I do think the mechanic is actually quite strong still, it has counterplay now. And specifically, characters previously that were probably supposed to be big bodies, looking at characters like Testament and Faust, for example, they might actually kind of like do their job in the meta. Axel as well, I would say, where they might actually do well against these bigger body characters because White Wall Assault will actually have counterplay, meaning these characters might actually have defining weaknesses like they're supposed to. The last system change that is worth talking about actually has to do with burst regeneration. So as I mentioned before, burst regen last version was crazy. You would sometimes get like 2 bursts around depending on the matchup you were playing. And what they did with this patch is they actually reduced the amount of burst you gain passively, first of all. So as you look up there at the top, the burst gauge generates a fair bit slower than it used to do. And while they didn't reduce the amount of burst you get for getting hit, it's actually the same amount as it was before, you still build burst passively even while getting comboed, so you effectively are building less burst while getting comboed, even though they didn't directly affect the amount of burst for getting hit. And on top of that, they also lower the amount of burst you get for getting wall stuck. So if you look up at the top, you build probably, I want to say, like 20% less burst than you used to. I don't know the exact number, but you can get wall stuck even 2 times and still not actually get even half of your burst gauge back. This is a really good change, in my opinion, because this makes resources matter more. Specifically, it makes Wall Assault matter more, where if you want to use something like a White Wall Assault, a neutral, or if you want to use an Orange Wall Assault just to like get pressure on block or something, that cost feels more impactful now, where there's more strategy behind, do I actually want to use my burst gauge for this? Or do I maybe want to hold it for an actual burst, because I might not actually get the gauge back in time when I need it most. And just overall, from everything I've been playing, from the Wall Assault, Hard Knockdown being removed, from the amount of burst gauge you get back being lowered, from DPRC being removed, the entire game flow and play patterns that we get into now feel so much healthier than they used to in Season 3.5, where the game feels honestly so new and fresh at this point, because I think there's a lot more decisions to be made in terms of our resources at hand. And that's always been one of the defining skills of Guilty Gear. Guilty Gear is a game about resource management, and I think their point with the burst gauge being more than just a burst was to kind of highlight that fact. But with the amount of burst regen that we had, I don't think it was really where they wanted it to be. But with this version of the game, it feels so much more in line with what players are expecting. And I think there's a lot more skill behind this version of the game with the type of resource management that you can have. So overall, just on a system level, I think this version of the game is looking really good. And when you have system changes like this, it affects a lot of different characters and a lot of different matchups in a lot of ways. So even though there's not that many changes, I think they're very impactful. And it's going to give the game kind of a new feel for a while, which is very nice. So real quick, I want to go over the character changes that came with this patch, and there's not that many of them. They actually only buffed a couple of characters. There's not really any direct character nerfs. And the first character I want to talk about is Elphelt, because this is a character that I really like, and I actually enjoyed playing her before. She's never really been considered that strong of a character. She's always been like mid to maybe low tier, depending on who you talk to. And more importantly than that, she's always been a character who's very one-dimensional. She's very much based on her Rekka series that she has. And this Rekka is very powerful. You know, it's 2 high-low unreactable mix-ups. It's very good, but that's all that she really did before. And this patch, not only does it make her better, I think it actually makes her more interesting, where more of her tools have value to them. So let's talk about what they actually did to her. So like I said, Elphelt has always been about her Rekka, and one counterplay to her Rekka is that she has a lot of natural gaps in her pressure. /5H always has a gap that's 6B'able, / into Rekka is 6B'able, 2H into Rekka is 6B'able, or 2D into Rekka is 6B'able. It's just like the inherent flaw of this character is that she's very weak against 6B. And what they did to alleviate this is they actually buffed her Fireball in a very interesting way. First of all, they added pushback to it. So you'll notice when I do a Fireball on block, she is pushed super far away from the opponent now. You were nowhere near them. You actually go to Narnia, I swear. And not only this, they also made it to where, because of the pushback, if the opponent does something like a 6P, maybe a string like this, it pushes you away outside of their 6P. But not just that, because the opponent is doing a 6P, they in-ball through your Fireball, which is the mid-hitting poke, essentially. But her Fireball has a property where it comes back. When you shoot it, it'll actually rebound and come back and hit the opponent. And this actually gives her a really interesting way to deal with the opponent doing 6P defensively. So you can do stuff like this, punish their 6P, and they get a knockdown for it. And you could technically do this before if you were spaced away, but it was a lot harder because it didn't have this increased pushback when she shoots the fireball. And also, the fireball itself, if the opponent just blocked it, you were punishable because you were so close to them. Now, she has a safe unblocked way to try to circumvent reversal 6Ps. This also applies to DP. So, for example, with Sin here, if I do Fireball, not only will it just make his DP whiff, it can also help me punish the DP, where I get to kind of pick up a conversion on the way back. And depending on what you do, if you do like the H version of a Fireball instead, you can just punish the DP, manually yourself. So there's a lot of intricacies to how you can use this now, and it makes her pressure so much more interesting as the attacker. And while it does make her pressure stronger, so the defender isn't exactly happy about this, I think offense just feeling more multi-layered just makes her more fun to fight against and play as. And I like that she's not just about her Rekka series anymore. The Fireball in general is just a better tool because of the pushback and the fact that they made the Fireball startup faster. I think overall, not only is it just a buff, I think it's a really good change for making her more fun and making her hit more complete. Another change they made Elphelt real quick is that they made her grenade. It actually launches the opponent on a grounded hit now. Previously, it would leave them standing. And this is big because it gives her a way more consistent and higher damage conversion than what she would get before. Now she can actually land and get a 6H into a full pickup, into a full combo, which is crazy corner carry, crazy damage from this type of thing. This move's already really good because it just goes over a bunch of things that people would use in neutral. If people want to use mid-hitting attacks in neutral, you can go over them with her grenade, and now you get way more reward for doing that type of thing. It also means that certain mix-ups give you more reward. It just makes the move just way more consistent in general, and I think is a very nice buff for the character, and makes the move more integral to what she wants to do, which is nice. On top of this, they also made her 2P. It is now 4 frames instead of 5 frames, which is nice. It still has the problem where it doesn't always combo into 6P, but having a 4 frame is just very nice to have in this game. Most characters only have 5 frames, so having a 4 frame is pretty cool. They also reduced the pushback on her 214K to where she gets more consistent OP from this, even off of pokes and stuff. You can usually run up and get a meaty close slash now, whereas before, a lot of the time, you'd have to settle for a meaty far slash or meaty 2S or something. This also gives her new situational combos, so counter hit 5H for example, you can do 214K and then link a close slash after to get a full conversion from counter hit 5H, which is really, really good. The amount of damage that this does and the fact that it gives her a wall break is actually crazy. This is very high reward off of counter hit 5H, so that change is also very good for her. Overall, I think they just did a really good job of making more of her kit feel more integral to the character and just make everything feel better to use. I don't think that she's a super strong character still. I think she's maybe high mid-tier to maybe just a truly high-tier character. It's kind of hard to say. The nerf that she did get is that losing the wall break on Wall Assault is obviously a downside to her because she is a snowball character. She wants to run you over. I think they changed her in a fantastic way where she's just healthier now. She's a better character, but she's not as toxic as she was before, and she gets to actually use more of her kit, which makes her more fun to play as and more fun to fight. So good job on her Arxis, honestly. The next character I want to talk about is Testament. Now, Testament is a character who generally throughout the life of this game has not been considered very good, but as a character people always want to be good, I feel like, but it just never really comes to realization. So Testament in this version of the game got some nice buffs, starting with their 2S now has less pushback, and this is relevant because it makes it where it basically always combos into 5H. And this is good because they can actually do some pretty good Wall Assault combos off of this. I don't play the character, so I'm not very good at doing them. But this is a character who really struggles to get meaningful hits, so allowing them to more consistently convert a good button like their 2S. Their 2S is pretty good. So being able to convert that more consistently into meaningful hits, or even just to push the opponent away so they can go back to their zoning game plan, is actually pretty good for them, I would say. So that's a nice type of change to see. They also made it to where Arbiter's Sign now hits full screen. This did not go full screen before. Previously, it would only go about 75% of the screen, and it would track the opponent up to about that point. Now it can hit literally just full screen, both versions can. This is pretty good against, I would say, zoning type characters, so characters like Faust or Jacko, characters that want to do two-step style neutral. This is just a way for them to harass them. You can't just pull an item safely as Faust anymore, for example. I think it's kind of an annoying change because I think Arbiter's just an annoying move. but it is clearly a good change for the character and will help them out in a lot of matchups where they probably already struggled. And it's just good to harass these slower moving characters as well, because they're not even safe close either. So that's a good change for them. The next thing that they did is they made it to where the Brave Reaper, the succubus that it leaves behind, it actually leaves it further away than it used to. So previously, it ends up here. I would say it ended up to about here before. So it goes a good like 20, maybe 30% further than it used to. And this is really relevant because it makes it so much harder for the opponent to avoid the crow afterwards. Because of where the succubus ends up, it's just such a better position for Testament as a character, I would say. Especially where, like, if you did it in like a block tree or something, the succubus would end up in front of the character, but now it ends up behind them, which makes it a lot harder to play around the crow as the defending character. And on top of that, they also made it to where Testament's teleport, which teleports them to the succubus. The succubus no longer goes away when they use their teleport. It actually stays there. Now, I'm not a Testament player, so I don't fully know the setups, but I've seen people labbing and, you know, putting to use some of these new setups where you can do stuff like, you know, you get a knockdown, you throw out the crow, and then, or you throw out the succubus, and then you teleport to it, and then you are able to then use that same succubus to throw out the crow to, you know, do a better combo or do better pressure, that type of thing. So this is a really interesting way to make the character have better offense, which is like kind of one of their weakest traits. So they went about a really interesting way of helping them have a little bit more stability in neutral, stability in their conversions, and giving them a little bit more potency on their offense, which I think is pretty cool to see for this character. So this might be the version of the game where they're actually relevant, especially because I think the system changes benefit them, where if we're going to be playing more neutral and resources matter a little bit more, I think that benefits a control character like Testament. As well as big bodies are characters that Testament theoretically should do well against, but because of White Wall Assault, they didn't really do that well. Now they might actually have relevancy as kind of like an off-meta character where they do well against big bodies, and maybe even doing well against zoners because they have good anti-zoning stuff like Arbiter. So we'll see what happens with Testament, but it looks kind of promising, and they might finally beat the low-tier allegations. Now, on to the last character that I want to talk about today, and probably the biggest winner of this entire patch is going to be Johnny. In Season 3.5, generally this character was rated one of the weakest characters, but I would say near the end of that version, people were starting to come around to the idea that maybe he wasn't that bad. Maybe he was like a mid-tier character or something like that. So the fact that we kind of got to that point where people are starting to think a little higher of him, and now he's getting this many buffs, I'm thinking this character might actually be a problem, this version of the game. So the first thing we need to talk about, and by far the craziest thing he got, is they made his dash faster. So his dash before used to be kind of slow. Now it is 15 frames. Look how fast I can get across the screen. That is insane. That is actually a jump scare. Like, he actually just wave dashes across the entire screen and he's in your face. Because it's 15 frames, this also helps his offense, where a problem Johnny had is that he was not very good at throwing people because you could just kind of sit there and react to his dash. But now, doing dash into throw is so fast, it's not reactable. You can't mash on it on reaction. And in general, you can't react to him dashing forward in neutral either. So it makes the character go from, you know, you can react to his movement if you're locked in, to you now have to guess. You literally have to guess when you think Johnny is going to advance forward. And that is going to just help the character so much. It's going to help him deal with zoners and other mid-range characters. It's going to help his offense. It helps tons of Oki setups from what I've seen, where he gets better Oki off of things. It probably helps combos. Like, it just is so impactful to every part of the game that he has a better dash now. I honestly don't really like that they did this. I think giving him an unreactable dash is a little too far. But, I mean, that's what they did, so we gotta live with it. The other change that they did is they made it to where Mistfinder now gives a big counter hit effect when it hits the opponent. And this is relevant because it actually gives Johnny the ability to pick up off of this. So you can do stuff like S Mistfinder into 2S Wild Assault, for example, which is really good. It gives them a way more rewarding frame trap. Also gives an ability to hit confirm things like counter hit K Mistfinder and hit confirm it into Joker. So you can do stuff like this. If I can do it right. There we go. Allows them to do stuff like that, which is a pretty good conversion. You can break the wall if you're near the corner. And it allows him to get better combos off of Anti or Mistfinder as well. So you can actually do stuff like this into Bar Slash, or I believe you can also dash up into Close Slash just like that. So obviously Mistfinder is still risky because it's still minus and punishable on block, but it also makes it way more rewarding than it used to be, and this is going to help his neutral and his offense by a lot. They also made it to where K Misfinder reaches further than it used to, so even from like about this far, you can hit someone with K Misfinder, which is really good. This is going to help him deal with, you know, zoners and stuff like that. So very nice change there as well. And I think just in general, the way the game is changing, you know, nerfing DP characters is good for him because he struggles against DPs. I think losing Wall Assault knockdown isn't that big of a deal for him. And he's a high health character, so not being able to like run him over and just kind of snowball your way through him is beneficial to him. He actually has pretty good neutral, especially now that he has an unreactable dash like this. I think almost everything about this version of the game looks good for Johnny, and I definitely have my eyes on him as being a big threat this version, for sure. So there's other characters that were changed this version as well, such as Bedman. I think Bedman's got some stuff this version, though I'm still not thinking that highly of him. But they're definitely seemingly making him a lot more fun. Characters like Axel and Zato also got some stuff, but it's still pretty up in the air what it's going to do for those characters. However, my final thoughts on this patch so far is that it is fantastic. This is honestly what we needed like 4 months ago. I don't know why we had to wait this long for this type of patch. But is it perfect? No, there's still other changes I would like to see. And obviously it's not the most like fun patch in terms of like there's not that many new toys to play with, so to speak, unless you play a handful of characters. But it's so well adjusted in terms of what they're affecting, and the play patterns I think are going to be a lot more fun regardless of what character you play. And I think it's very impressive the type of patch it is. It probably just needed to be sooner. That's really my only complaint. The biggest miss of this patch, however, has probably been Baiken for people. Now, Baiken, she lost parry PRC because it was a reversal, so they took out the ability to RC it. And beyond that, she didn't get anything. They didn't give her any buffs for some reason. She has generally been one of the weakest characters of Season 3.5, like somewhere in bottom 5, bottom 7. And losing Wall Assault Hard Knockdown Wall Break was pretty bad for her, and they didn't give her anything to compensate. So she just strictly got nerfed, and she was already not good. So this is really the only character that I feel like they just straight up missed out on this version. And hopefully in October, when we get the next patch, which is the next thing I should mention, is that they've already confirmed we're getting another patch in October or November. So this patch is really just kind of here to tide us over until we get the bigger patch later in the year. And I'm really curious to see how they're going to change things then. Anyways, that's going to do it for this one. There's still tons of things that I need to figure out for this patch, but I do want to know, what do you guys think about it? Are you enjoying this version of the game? Are you happy with the system changes and the character changes they made? And also, what types of changes are you hoping that they make in the future? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're down there, consider dropping a like and subbing to the channel. Likes and comments actually really help the YouTube algorithm, like immensely so. So I really appreciate anyone that can leave a like and a comment. I'm really trying to grow my YouTube, so thank you very much. Anyways, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.